Left behind on a deserted road, a blind baby is shielded by a mighty buffalo. As nature begins to unfold its secrets, he'll learn his destiny is tied to something much greater. The deserted road that cut through the outskirts of Cypress Creek was illuminated only by the faint glow of the moon. Richard Carter, his hands firm on the steering wheel of his black Porsche, felt the weight of the decisions he had made throughout his life. His face, marked by premature wrinkles, reflected in the rearview mirror as he parked his car on the shoulder. The silence of the night was broken by the soft crying coming from the back seat. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, as if seeking strength for what he was about to do. "It's best for everyone," he whispered to himself, trying to believe his own words. With a deep sigh, he got out of the car and picked up the small bundle, wrapped in a worn blanket. The baby, only 3 months old, now slept serenely, oblivious to the fate his biological father had planned for him. Richard looked at his son with a mixture of pain and resignation. The doctor's words still echoed in his mind. "Your son was born with a rare condition that will permanently affect his vision. He will never see the world as we do." For Richard Carter, one of the most influential businessmen in the American agricultural industry, that was unacceptable. A blind heir could not lead his empire. A Carter should be perfect, flawless. "Lucy, forgive me," he murmured, remembering his wife who had passed away during their son's complicated birth. She would never approve of what he was doing now. With hesitant steps, Richard approached a large tree on the roadside and carefully placed the baby, protected by the blanket, on the ground. "Someone will find you, little Peter," he said with a choked voice. "Someone who can give you what I cannot." As he walked away, Richard felt something strange in the air. An icy wind ran down his spine, and the silence of the night was interrupted by a deep, profound sound, a snort that didn't seem to come from an ordinary animal. Intrigued and frightened, he looked back but saw only the darkness of the road. He hurried to the car and quickly drove away, trying to leave behind not only his son, but also the weight of guilt that was beginning to consume him. A few miles away, at the modest Martin Ranch, John was observing the starry sky from the porch. Something in the air seemed different that night. "Claire, are you hearing that?" he asked his wife, who joined him on the porch. "It sounds like the black buffalo," she replied with a shiver. "The legends say it appears when something important is about to happen." John grabbed a flashlight and his hat. "I'll check it out." "Be careful," Claire asked, feeling an inexplicable anxiety. Following the sound, John reached the deserted so. When he pointed the flashlight toward the shoulder, he saw an image he would never forget. An imposing black buffalo was standing next to a tree, its gaze fixed on a small bundle on the ground. As he cautiously approached, John realized it was a baby. The buffalo, surprisingly, showed no aggression. On the contrary, it seemed to be protecting the child. "Who would do such a thing?" John murmured, taking the baby in his arms and noticing that, despite the cold, he was warm, as if a mysterious force was protecting him. When the baby opened his eyes, John noticed they didn't focus on anything. He understood then that the child was blind. Around the little one's neck, a strange symbol in the form of a medallion glowed faintly under the moonlight. The black buffalo emitted a deep sound and stepped back, as if its mission had been accomplished. John looked at the animal and then at the baby in his arms. "Let's go, little one," he said tenderly. "We have a long road ahead." Claire waited anxiously on the porch when she saw John returning with a small bundle in his arms. Her heart raced, sensing what it meant. "My God, John, is that a child?" she asked, running to meet her husband. John nodded, revealing the baby, who slept peacefully. "I found him abandoned on the road, and that's not all." He hesitated, as if searching for words to describe the inexplicable. "The black buffalo was there, Claire. It seemed to be protecting him." Claire took the baby in her arms, her eyes brimming with tears. For years the couple had tried to have children without success. It was as if fate had finally answered their prayers, albeit in a mysterious way. "He's blind, Claire," John explained softly. "Maybe that's why they abandoned him." She looked at the baby with even more tenderness. "That doesn't matter. He's perfect." Her fingers gently touched the medallion around the child's neck. "What is this?" "I don't know. It looks like some kind of ancient symbol. Something related to nature. Strange, isn't it? Tomorrow we'll go to town to register him and contact the authorities, but—" Claire hesitated, a silent plea in her eyes. John understood what his wife meant. If no one claimed the child, they could adopt him. It was an opportunity that fate had presented them, and he didn't have the heart to deny it to Claire. "What should we name him?" John asked, caressing the baby's few hairs. "Peter," Claire replied without hesitation. "Peter Martin." That same night, miles away, Richard Carter entered his luxurious mansion in the hills of Cypress Creek. The oppressive silence of the place contrasted with the warmth that once existed when Lucy was still alive. Now each room seemed to judge him for the decision he had made. His cell phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Augustus, his personal lawyer. "The documents are ready, Mr. Carter. Officially, your son died along with your wife during childbirth." Richard felt the weight of those words. "Thank you, Augustus. No one should know the truth, understood? No one." After hanging up, Richard poured himself a generous shot of whiskey and walked to his office. He opened a locked drawer and took out a photo of Lucy pregnant, smiling radiantly. Around her neck, the same medallion he had left with his son, a symbol that had belonged to her family for generations. "It was a silly superstition," he muttered, remembering how Lucy insisted that the medallion protected the guardians of nature. She and her beliefs about the mystical connection with animals, especially the buffalo that her family raised. A thunderclap cut through the sky, making Richard start. For a moment, he thought he heard again that strange snort from the road. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. It was just guilt, nothing more. Years passed. At the Martin Ranch, Peter grew up surrounded by the love of his adoptive parents. At 5 years old, despite his blindness, he demonstrated an incredible perception of his surroundings and a special connection with animals. "Mom, the guardian is here," Peter said one morning, sitting on the porch. Claire looked around, confused. "Who, my son?" "The big buffalo. He comes to visit me every morning. Don't you hear him?" And indeed, in the distance, the deep sound of a buffalo could be heard. John, who was mowing the grass near the fence, stopped and observed. There it was, the imposing black buffalo, watching the house from a distance. "How does he know, Claire?" John asked later, intrigued by his son's perception. "How does Peter always know when the buffalo is nearby?" Claire watched her son playing in the yard, perfectly following the sound of the birds. "There are things we can't explain, John. This boy has a special gift." That night, as Peter slept, the medallion around his neck emitted a faint glow. In his dreams, the boy saw green fields, buffalo running free, and a woman with a gentle smile who seemed to be calling him. 10 years had passed since the night Peter was found. The Martin Ranch, once modest, had prospered surprisingly. The animals were healthy, the harvests abundant, as if a blessing hovered over the property. Peter, now 10 years old, ran through the field with a confidence that defied his condition. Despite his blindness, he knew every inch of the ranch, every tree, every stone. His connection with nature transcended physical vision. "Peter, be careful!" John shouted when he saw his son approaching a newly arrived bull, known for its aggressive temperament. But Peter showed no fear. He slowly approached the animal, which, to everyone's surprise, calmed down instantly. The boy extended his hand and gently touched the bull's muzzle. "He's just scared, Dad," Peter explained naturally. "He misses his old pasture and the friends he left behind." John and Claire exchanged perplexed glances. It wasn't the first time Peter had demonstrated this extraordinary ability to understand animals, to feel their emotions, as if he could see through their souls. That same afternoon, as Peter rested under the shade of a tree, the black buffalo appeared again. Years had passed, but the animal maintained its distant vigilance like a silent guardian. "Hello, friend," Peter greeted, turning in the direction of the buffalo without needing to see it. "Have you come to tell me more stories?" To any observer, it would just be a boy talking to himself, but for Peter it was much more. When he touched the medallion around his neck, he could feel a deep connection with the buffalo, as if they could communicate on a level that transcended words. In his silent dialogues, Peter began to have visions, fragments of images that didn't make complete sense. A pregnant woman with the same medallion, vast fields with buffalo, a man in a suit in a luxury car, tears streaming down his face. "Son, who are you talking to?" Claire asked, approaching. Cautiously, Peter smiled. "With my friend the Guardian, he shows me things, Mom. Things I can't see with my eyes, but that I see and hear." He pointed to his own heart. Claire sat next to her son, growing concern in her expression. "What things, Peter?" "I see a woman. She smiles at me and wears a necklace like mine." His hand touched the medallion. "I think she's my first mother." Claire's heart tightened. She and John had never hidden from Peter that he was adopted, but they also never knew details about his biological parents. "And what else do you see, my son?" "A sad man. He cries a lot, Mum. I think he did something he regrets." That night, John and Claire talked worriedly about Peter's visions. "Maybe we should consult that specialist in Cypress Creek," John suggested. "His gift goes beyond normal perception." "I'm afraid, John. What if they discover something about his biological parents? What if they try to take him from us?" John hugged his wife tightly. "Nothing and no one will separate our family, I promise." Meanwhile, in Cypress Creek, Richard Carter faced the worst financial crisis of his life. His empire, once invincible, was crumbling under the weight of bad decisions and failed investments. But it wasn't just the financial aspect that tormented him. Since that fateful night, Richard had been haunted by nightmares. He dreamed of his son, of Lucy, and there was always a black buffalo watching him with accusing eyes. Guilt corroded him from within like a slow and relentless poison. "Mr. Carter, the investors are demanding a position," his secretary informed, interrupting his dark thoughts. Richard nodded, absent. His eyes were fixed on a photograph on the wall, him and Lucy at their buffalo ranch, a place he had sold shortly after what he called the incident. Around her neck, the medallion that symbolized her family's ancestral connection with those animals. That night, while the Martins slept, Peter rose silently. The medallion around his neck glowed with unusual intensity. Outside, the black buffalo waited. The boy walked to it with confidence, as if he could see perfectly in the dark. "It's time, isn't it?" Peter whispered, touching the animal's muzzle. "It's time to find my origins." The decision to take Peter to Cypress Creek wasn't easy for the Martins. After weeks of debate, they finally agreed that their son's extraordinary abilities deserved a deeper investigation. The big city, initially, intimidated Peter. The sounds were many, confusing, different from the natural harmony of the ranch. But he adapted quickly, using his keen perception to create a mental map of the environment. "Dr. Mitchell is the best pediatric neurologist in the state," John explained as they waited in the clinic's waiting room. "He'll help us understand what's happening." Peter smiled, calm. "Don't worry, Dad. The Guardian told me we'd be safe here." Claire squeezed her husband's hand. Their son's connection with the mysterious black buffalo still intrigued them deeply. After a series of tests, Dr. Mitchell invited the parents for a private conversation, while Peter waited in the playroom, adapted for visually impaired children. "The results are fascinating," the doctor began, adjusting his glasses. "Peter's brain activity shows patterns we rarely see. Areas normally dormant in blind people are extraordinarily active in him." "What does that mean?" Claire asked, apprehensive. "Peter doesn't see with his eyes, but his brain has developed an alternative form of perception. Some call it clairvoyance, others a sixth sense. In medicine, we're still discovering the limits of this capacity." John leaned forward. "And what about the visions he has, of the people he believes are his biological parents?" The doctor hesitated. "That's harder to explain scientifically, but there are documented cases of genetic memory, of connections that transcend the physical." He paused. "Have you tried to discover anything about his biological parents?" The Martins exchanged worried glances. "We fear that might complicate our legal situation," John confessed. "The adoption was irregular, as you know." The doctor nodded understandingly. "I understand, but perhaps that's an important piece of the puzzle." Meanwhile, in the playroom, Peter was talking with an elderly lady who introduced herself as a hospital volunteer. "What a beautiful medallion," she commented, noticing the object Peter was wearing. The boy smiled, touching the medallion affectionately. "It belonged to my biological mother. At least that's what I feel." The lady asked permission to touch it, and when she did, she gasped in surprise. "This symbol belongs to the Meadows family. They were known as the protectors of the buffalo. In the Bayou Lands." Peter felt a shiver run down his spine. "Did you know this family?" "Oh, yes. Lucy Meadows married a powerful businessman, Richard Carter. A tragic story that she died in childbirth along with the baby. At least that's what was reported at the time." Peter's heart raced. Those names resonated deeply within him, as if they had always been part of his existence. That same afternoon, in his nearly empty office, Richard Carter stared at the bankruptcy notice with an empty look. Everything he had built was crumbling. The fortune, the prestige, the respect, all slipping away like sand between his fingers. His lawyer, Augustus, hurriedly entered the room. "Richard, we need to talk urgently." "More problems?" he asked bitterly. "It's about your son." Richard froze. "My son is dead, Augustus, along with Lucy. You yourself took care of the documents." The lawyer shook his head, visibly disturbed. "A blind 10-year-old boy was brought to the Central Hospital today. He wears the Meadows family medallion, Lucy's medallion." Richard's blood froze in his veins. It was impossible. He himself had left the baby on that deserted road 10 years ago. How could he have survived? And more importantly, how had he come to Cypress Creek just when his empire was crumbling? "The boy has unusual abilities, Richard. They say he has a special connection with animals." Augustus hesitated. "Like Lucy had." Richard stood up abruptly, his legs shaky. The memory of the snort that night, of the black buffalo he thought he had imagined, it all came back with overwhelming force. "I need to see him," he murmured, more to himself than to the lawyer. Outside the hospital, invisible to ordinary, human eyes, the black buffalo watched. The circle was beginning to close. Fate had woven its threads, and now it was time for the reunion that would forever change the life of Richard Carter and his abandoned son. The rain fell heavily on Cypress Creek when Richard Carter arrived at the Central Hospital. His heart beat erratically, a mixture of fear and expectation dominating his thoughts. 10 years had passed since that fateful night, and now the past was coming back to collect its debt. Augustus waited for him in the lobby. "They're still here. The doctor is conducting more tests on the boy." Richard nodded, unable to formulate words. How would he explain his actions? How would he justify having abandoned his own son because of his blindness? In the doctor's office, John and Claire listened attentively to Dr. Mitchell's recommendations. Peter, sitting in a special chair, seemed distant, as if his mind were elsewhere. Suddenly the boy straightened up. "He's here," he said with surprising clarity. "Whose son?" Claire asked, confused. "The sad man from my visions, my biological father." At that exact moment, someone knocked on the door. Dr. Mitchell opened it, revealing an elegant middle-aged man with deep dark circles and a troubled expression. "Can I help you?" asked the doctor. "My name is Richard Carter," he replied with a trembling voice. "I believe that my son is here." A heavy silence took over the room. John instinctively stood up, placing himself between Peter and the newcomer, while Claire protectively embraced her son. "That's impossible," John stated firmly. "Peter's son died along with his mother. All the newspapers reported it." Richard lowered his eyes, the shame evident on his face. "That's what I wanted everyone to believe." His voice was almost a whisper. Peter, surprisingly calm, gently moved away from his adoptive mother's embrace. "It's okay, Mum. I knew this day would come." The boy stood up and walked confidently toward Richard, stopping a few steps away from him. "You abandoned me on a deserted road because you were ashamed of having a blind son," he stated, without accusation in his voice, merely stating a fact. Richard felt his legs weaken. How could that boy know? How could he speak with such certainty about something that happened when he was just a baby? How do you know that?" he stammered. "The Guardian showed me," He was there that night. Guardian. The black buffalo, Peter explained naturally. He has been protecting me since then, just like the Martins. He turned toward his adoptive parents, a gentle smile on his face. They gave me the love you couldn't give. Richard felt the weight of each word like a stone on his chest. Tears, he had long repressed, began to stream down his face. I made a terrible mistake, he admitted, his voice choked. There isn't a day I don't deeply regret it. John stepped forward, his expression hard. You abandoned your own son because of his visual impairment. What kind of monster does that to a helpless child? A man blinded by his own pride, Richard replied without trying to defend himself. Blinder than my own son. Dr. Mitchell, noticing the growing tension, suggested that everyone sit down for a calmer conversation. Reluctantly, the Martins agreed. How did you find us? Claire asked, still holding Peter's hand. My lawyer heard about a blind boy with the Meadows family medallion, Richard explained. The medallion that belonged to my late wife, Lucy. Peter touched the object around his neck. My mother was special, wasn't she? She had a gift similar to mine. Richard looked at his son with astonishment. Yes, Lucy had an inexplicable connection with animals, especially buffalo. Her family had raised them for generations, with an almost religious respect. He hesitated, his voice failing. The medallion symbolizes that connection, an ancestral tradition. Dr. Mitchell, who was observing the interaction with professional fascination, intervened. This could explain Peter's extraordinary abilities. Some talents seem to pass genetically, in ways that science is still trying to understand. A powerful thunderclap shook the windows of the office. The storm was intensifying outside, as if nature itself was responding to the tension of the moment. Peter turned to the window, an enigmatic smile on his face. The Guardian is restless today. He feels that something important is about to happen. How do you know these things, Peter? Richard asked, genuinely intrigued. The same way I know you're bankrupt and desperate, the boy replied with simplicity. The same way I know the buffalo are disappearing from the bayou, and that it's connected somehow. Richard paled. How could his son know about his financial situation? How could he be aware of the mysterious decrease in wild buffalo herds that had begun exactly 10 years ago when he had abandoned him? What's happening here goes beyond immediate understanding, Peter declared with surprising maturity for his 10 years. But soon all the pieces will fit together. The Guardian assured me of that. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. The days that followed. The reunion were filled with tension and discoveries. After long discussions, it was agreed that Peter would remain with the Martins, the only people he truly considered as parents, but Richard would be allowed to get to know his son better and understand his extraordinary gifts. Richard rented a modest house on the outskirts of Cypress Creek, not far from the hotel where the Martins were staying. His financial empire had completely collapsed, but strangely that didn't bother him as much as he had imagined. Something more important now occupied his thoughts. I want to show you something, Richard said to Peter on a sunny afternoon, after obtaining permission from the Martins for an outing, a place that meant a lot to your mother. They drove for almost an hour, entering a region where the bayou began to extend in its majestic beauty. Peter kept his face turned to the window, as if he could absorb the landscape through other senses. We're approaching the old Meadows ranch, Richard explained. Your mother's family raised buffalo here for 5 generations. What happened to it? Peter asked, already intuiting the answer. Richard sighed heavily. I sold it shortly after. After that night, I couldn't bear the memories. When they finally arrived, Peter got out of the car with surprising confidence, as if he already knew the place. In the distance, standing majestically in the field, was the black buffalo, his faithful guardian. He followed us here, Richard commented, astonished. Peter smiled. He never really leaves me. We're connected somehow. Walking through what remained of the old ranch, now part of a larger farm dedicated to intensive agriculture, Richard shared stories about Lucy and her family. How they treated the buffalo with almost sacred respect. How they believed these animals were guardians of the natural balance of the region. Your mother used to say that each Meadows was born with a guardian buffalo, Richard recounted, his voice choked with emotion. An animal that protected and guided them throughout their lives. Peter touched the medallion around his neck, like the symbol here. Exactly. The medallion represents that ancestral connection. As they talked, a man with a rough appearance approached, accompanied by 2 armed security guards. "You're on private property," he announced arrogantly. "I need to ask you to leave immediately." Richard recognized the man. "Anthony Miller, you bought these lands after acquiring my company, correct?" Miller smiled coldly. "The business world is like that, Carter. The strong survive, the weak disappear." His gaze shifted to Peter. "And who's the boy?" Before Richard could respond, Peter stepped forward. "I'm Peter Meadows Carter," he declared firmly, using his biological parents' surnames for the first time. "And you're destroying the natural habitat of the buffalo that my family protected for generations." Miller laughed mockingly. "A blind boy giving me lessons on preservation? How touching." He approached, intimidating. "These lands belong to me now, and I do with them as I please." Suddenly, a powerful snort cut through the air. The black buffalo was slowly approaching, its gaze fixed on Miller, who instinctively backed away. "That animal is dangerous," warned one of the security guards, reaching for his weapon. "No!" shouted Peter, positioning himself between the buffalo and the men. "He won't hurt anyone if he's not threatened." To everyone's amazement, the boy walked directly to the imposing animal and touched its muzzle. The buffalo calmed instantly. "Incredible," Miller murmured, genuinely impressed. "How does he do that?" Richard observed the scene with a mixture of pride and astonishment. His son had truly inherited Lucy's gift, and perhaps even more potently. "I'm going to find out what's happening with the disappearing buffalo," Peter declared, still caressing the animal. "The Guardian showed me in visions. Someone is hunting them illegally and it's destabilizing the entire bayou ecosystem." Miller visibly paled. "That's absurd. The boy is making up stories." But Peter continued with unwavering certainty. "You've converted conservation areas into plantations, destroyed natural habitats, and you're even involved with hunters who kill buffalo to sell their parts in the Asian black market." Richard looked shocked at Miller. "Is this true, Anthony?" The businessman backed away, visibly disturbed. "How could he know? I mean, this is complete nonsense. I'll sue you for defamation." Peter smiled serenely. "The truth can't stay hidden. Forever, Mr. Miller. The Guardian showed me everything, including where the evidence of your environmental crimes is hidden." At that moment, as if responding to Peter's words, the sky suddenly darkened and a herd of buffalo appeared on the horizon, advancing majestically toward them. It was an impressive, almost supernatural vision. "This is impossible," Miller murmured, fear evident in his voice. These animals had disappeared from this region. "They were waiting," Peter replied calmly, "waiting for someone from the Meadows family to return to restore the balance." News about the blind boy who talked to buffalo spread quickly through Cypress Creek and the surrounding region. Journalists surrounded the hotel where the Martins were staying, eager for a story about the lost heir of the Carters and his extraordinary gift. "This is getting out of control," John commented, closing the curtains of the room to avoid the cameras and flashes. "We need to protect Peter from all this exposure." Claire nodded, concerned. "He's just a child despite all these incredible gifts." In the corner of the room, Peter played calmly with a small buffalo sculpture that Richard had brought him as a gift, a piece that had belonged to Lucy. "Don't worry," said the boy, surprising his adoptive parents. "All this is part of the Guardian's plan." Before they could question what that meant, the phone rang. It was Richard, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to talk. Something big is happening. Can I come by in half an hour?" When Richard arrived, he brought with him a folder full of documents and a grave countenance. "After the encounter with Miller, I started investigating," he explained, spreading the papers on the table. "Peter was right. There's an illegal buffalo hunting operation happening in the bayou, sponsored by Miller and other businessmen who acquired land in the region." John examined the documents with a worried expression. "This is very dangerous, Richard. We're talking about powerful people." We need to report them, Richard insisted. For Lucy, for Peter, for the Meadows family legacy. Claire, always prudent, intervened. And how will we explain how we obtained this information? Will we say that a mystical buffalo told our blind son? A heavy silence hung over the room. It was a valid point. I have an idea, Peter said suddenly, raising his face. The Guardian showed me where the missing buffalo are. If we can photograph the location and prove the illegal hunting, we'll have concrete evidence. Richard looked at his son with admiration. You know exactly where they are? Peter nodded with conviction. In an abandoned farm 3 hours from here, an old meat-packing plant has been converted into a clandestine processing center. The adults exchanged incredulous looks. How could Peter know such details? It's not safe to take Peter there. Claire argued, protective as always. Mom, Peter said gently, holding her hand, I need to go. The Guardian will be with me, and he would never allow anything bad to happen to me. After hours of debate, a plan was devised. Richard would contact an old friend in the environmental police, while he and John would verify the location indicated by Peter. Claire would stay at the hotel with the boy, maintaining constant contact by phone. However, the next morning, as everyone prepared to execute the plan, an alarming discovery: Peter had disappeared during the night. My God, where could he have gone? Exclaimed Claire, panicking. John found a note on his son's bed. Don't worry. The Guardian called me. I'll return when I complete my mission. Richard paled. Did he go alone to the abandoned farm? Impossible, John rebutted. He couldn't have left the hotel without being seen, much less traveled 3 hours alone. But everyone knew that. When it came to Peter and his mysterious gift, the impossible seemed to become possible. The police were immediately alerted. Search teams quickly formed, with volunteers combing every corner of Cypress Creek. Richard, consumed by guilt and desperation, personally led one of the teams. First, I abandoned him. Now I've lost him again, he lamented as he drove through the bayou roads. John, seated beside him, remained silent, divided between the anger he still felt toward Richard and the overwhelming concern for his adoptive son. Following the direction Peter had indicated, they finally arrived at an isolated property. The rusty sign at the entrance still showed the old name, Bayou Meatpacking. This is it, Richard murmured, parking the car at a safe distance. Approaching cautiously, they could hear the sound of engines and voices. The place, supposedly abandoned, was in full activity. Hidden behind bushes, they witnessed with horror men loading buffalo parts onto refrigerated trucks. Peter was right, John whispered. But where is he? As if answering the question, a powerful snort cut through the air. The black buffalo, Peter's guardian, appeared in the clearing in front of the meat-packing plant. On its back, serene and confident, was Peter. My God, exclaimed Richard, he's riding the buffalo. The vision was surreal, a blind 10-year-old boy mounted on an imposing black buffalo, facing a group of illegal hunters alone. This land belongs to the buffalo, Peter declared with a voice that seemed amplified by nature itself. And I, Peter Meadows Carter, am here to protect them. The men, stunned by the apparition, didn't know how to react. Some dropped their tools and fled, while others remained, paralyzed by astonishment. At that moment, the sound of approaching sirens broke the spell of the scene. The environmental police arrived, alerted by Richard before they left the hotel. How did you do this? John asked later, embracing his son with a mixture of relief and astonishment. Peter smiled, that serene smile he always had when talking about the Guardian. I didn't do anything alone. The Guardian brought me here during the night. He knew it was time to restore the balance. The evening news announced the largest operation against environmental crimes ever conducted in the bayou. Dozens of businessmen were implicated, including Anthony Miller. Thousands of acres of protected lands would be returned to their natural state, and buffalo preservation projects would be implemented. And in all the reports, there was mention of the mysterious blind boy who had triggered the entire investigation, mounted on a black buffalo like the ancient guardians of bayou legends. 3 months had passed since the events that became known as the Buffalo Miracle. The case had gained national attention, leading to a series of investigations that exposed a vast network of environmental crimes in the bayou. The Martin Ranch had been transformed. With financial help from environmental NGOs and donations from people touched by Peter's story, the property was expanded and converted into a sanctuary for rescued buffalo. The Guardian Sanctuary, as it was named, became a symbol of preservation and respect for nature. Richard Carter, now a transformed man, dedicated all his knowledge and remaining time to the project. He had sold his last properties in the city and lived in a simple house near the sanctuary. On a sunny spring afternoon, as Peter fed the buffalo with the same naturalness of someone who could see every movement of the animals, Richard approached, with an envelope in his hands. "Peter, I need to show you something," he said, sitting next to his son on a fallen log. "I found this among your mother's things." It was an old diary bound in leather, with the meadow symbol engraved on the cover, the same symbol on the medallion that Peter carried. "May I?" asked Peter, extending his hands. Upon touching the diary, the boy felt an immediate connection, as if Lucy's presence was there, alive in the pages written by her hands. "She wrote about you even before you were born," Richard explained, his voice choked. "About visions she had during pregnancy. Visions of you grown mounted on a black buffalo protecting the bayou." Peter smiled without surprise. "Did she know I would be blind?" "Yes," Richard confirmed, "and she said it would be a gift, not a limitation, that you would see what others couldn't see." A solitary tear ran down Peter's face. "That's why she left the medallion with me." Richard nodded, swallowing hard. Lucy believed that each Meadows was born with a specific gift, a unique connection with nature. Hers was understanding. "Animals, yours seems to go beyond." At that moment, a familiar snort announced the arrival of the Guardian. The imposing black buffalo approached, majestic as always. At its side, to everyone's surprise, was a younger buffalo, almost a calf. "Look at that," commented Claire, who was approaching with lemonade. "It seems the Guardian brought a friend." Peter stood up and walked confidently toward the animals. He caressed the muzzle of the Guardian and then of the younger buffalo. "It's not just any friend," the boy declared with certainty. "This is my new Guardian." John and Richard exchanged confused looks. "What do you mean, son?" asked John. Peter turned toward them, a serene smile on his face. "The Guardian has completed his mission. He brought me back to my origins, helped restore the balance of the bayou, and reunited our extended family." He made a gesture encompassing everyone. "Now he can rest." As if understanding every word, the black buffalo slightly inclined its head, in a gesture that seemed like farewell. "Is he leaving?" asked Richard, incredulous. "Not exactly," Peter replied. "He will always be around, but in a different way. Each Meadows has their own Guardian, and this young buffalo will be mine from now on." That night, a special celebration was organized at the sanctuary. Local residents, representatives of indigenous tribes from the region, environmentalists and journalists gathered to witness what Peter had announced as the Guardian's Passage. Under the moonlight, in the center of a circle formed by torches, Peter and the two buffalo were the center of attention. The boy, wearing traditional bayou attire and with the Meadows medallion shining on his chest, began to narrate a story that seemed to come from immemorial times. "Since the beginning, buffalo and men have walked together in these lands." His voice, normally childlike, now sounded laden with ancestral wisdom. "Each generation of human guardians is born with a buffalo protector, a guide that connects them with the wisdom of nature." As Peter spoke, something extraordinary was happening. The black buffalo, the old guardian, emitted a soft glow, almost imperceptible to most, but vividly real to those with spiritual sensitivity. "Today, my ancestral guardian passes his wisdom to my new companion," continued Peter, placing one hand on each buffalo, "and with this the pact between our family and these noble animals is renewed." A sudden wind momentarily extinguished the torches, plunging the circle into darkness. When the flames relit, the black buffalo had disappeared, leaving only the young buffalo beside Peter. Murmurs of amazement ran through the crowd. Some swore they had seen the black buffalo dissolve into a bluish light. Others claimed it had simply walked away into the darkness. But everyone felt they had witnessed something deeply mystical and significant. "Where did he go?" whispered Richard, astonished. Peter smiled, touching the medallion on his chest. "He's here now, and in every buffalo we protect, the cycle renews itself." In the weeks that followed, surprising news came from all parts of the bayou. Entire herds of buffalo, believed to be locally extinct, reappeared in protected areas. It was as if they were responding to a silent call, returning to lands that were once theirs. The Guardian Sanctuary became a center for research and preservation, combining modern scientific knowledge with the ancestral wisdom that Peter seemed to naturally channel. On a quiet afternoon, as Richard and the Martins watched Peter play with his young guardian buffalo, Claire expressed the thought they all shared. "It's amazing how life surprises us. A blind boy who sees further than all of us, an animal that becomes a guardian, a family found in the most unlikely circumstances. And to think I almost destroyed all of this," reflected Richard, the remorse still visible in his eyes. John, who had gradually developed an unlikely friendship with Richard, placed a hand on his shoulder. "The important thing is that we're all here now, united by Peter and his mission." On the horizon, the sun was beginning to set, painting the bayou sky with vibrant colors. Peter, seated close to his guardian, raised his face as if he could see the spectacle. "Thank you," he whispered, the words laden with a gratitude that went beyond the present moment, beyond the people gathered there. And for a brief instant, everyone swore they saw the silhouette of an imposing black buffalo against the setting sun, like a reminder that some guardians, even invisible, never really leave us. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe